You existed before the world began, and you've got times and the seasons in your hand. You rule and reign, majestic is your name. Hey, Yahweh, my Yahweh. You've got times and seasons. You rule and reign. Hey, Yahweh. My Yahweh. Hey, you existed. You've got times and seasons. And you rule and reign. Hey, Yahweh. Lift your hands to the King tonight. Everybody say, hey, Yahweh. Oh, my Yahweh. Very simple song. Can we do it together?
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Yahweh's House of Worship and Restoration International Ministries. Glad you could join us this afternoon. Last week we were looking at the Seder meal and what we were celebrating. We continue to celebrate that this week, and it finishes tomorrow. So for the last 7 days, we have been celebrating the Feast of the Unleavened Bread and the Passover. And it's been an exciting time for us. I hope last week when I shared with you about the Seder meal, the Haggadah, and how it's celebrated and why it's celebrated, I hope that you were able to gain some understanding from it, because it's extremely insightful. As I shared last week, there are 7 main feast days that Yahweh wants us to continue to celebrate, because these feast days will form part of the of Revelation, part of what is to come. Okay, so it's very important. The feast days is not just for those people back then in the Old Testament. It also continues in the New Testament, where I shared with you last week. But over the last few weeks, we've also been looking at Revelations. Now, there is so much information contained in the book of Revelations that we wouldn't be able to even start to comprehend it all in one day or one lesson or in one go. So we have been looking chapter by chapter at the book of Revelations. Last time we looked at Revelations chapter 16. So today we are going to be looking at Revelations 17, where it speaks about a scarlet woman. And I will be explaining for you who this scarlet woman is and what she represents in the book of Revelations. So Revelation 17, it portrays a harlot in purple and the scarlet woman. She conducted her business, it says, with the kings of the earth. But the question is, who is this woman and what does this woman represent in the book of Revelation chapter 17? So if you turn your Bibles to Revelation 17, I'd like you to get your notepad pads, your pens, your pencil, whatever writing instruments you have, whatever resources, and take notes because it's very important. So Revelation 17 starts with John receiving a vision. John received a vision from one of the 7 angels who had 7 bowls. The angel asked John to come up so that he could show him the judgment and the doom of the great prostitute who is seated on the waters. Now, this prostitute was influencing nations into doing disruptive things, into doing things that were against Yahweh's laws. So the book of Revelation chapter 17 is very similar to Revelation chapter 12, which I shared a few weeks ago. This chapter provides a brief history of the enemy's effort to destroy Yahshua and Yahweh's people. Now, this also includes the true church of Yahweh. So Revelation 17, it gives a very clear detail of the work of a powerful false religious system that has long been deceived and has ruled over numerous nations and people. In Revelations 12, so if I go back briefly to Revelations 12, in Revelations 12, just as a quick reminder, we looked at the woman, the child, and the dragon. We saw a woman who represented the Old Testament Israel and the assembly of Yahweh. In Revelation 17, we now see the depiction of a woman, but an immoral woman. So the woman in Revelations 12, she was carrying a child, or she gave birth to a child, which is a type of Yahshua. So this woman was different in Revelations 12 to the woman in Revelation 17. So this woman in 17 was described as a whore or a harlot. And I don't need to break that down anymore for you. You all know what that means. So again, Revelation 17 begins in verse 1, which identifies this woman in the chapter as a whore or a harlot, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication. That is in verse 2. Now, you all know what the term fornication means, but it's not literal fornication in the sense as we understand it. But this seems to refer to a political conspiracy in which the leaders of these nations will collaborate with this immoral woman. In other words, they'll have been in negotiation and in discussion, in agreement with this woman in her spiritual misconduct. So they will communicate, they'll collaborate with this woman and agree in her misconduct. With each party, each political party or each system seeking its own advantage, because after all, that is what they're about. Similarly, Yahweh called Israel's disobedience to him adultery and also harlotry. That's what the term fornication and adultery, what it means, where it comes from. And I'll give you some Bible references to that in support of the fact that it's not literal adultery and fornications. Jeremiah 13 verses 8 and 9, and Jeremiah 5 and 7, Jeremiah 13 and 27, and Ezekiel 6 verses 32 bears reference to the type of adultery or harlotry which Yahshua is speaking about. So this fallen woman's influence, it was and is extensive. In addition to her influence over the kings of the earth, she holds captive. She will hold captive a large portion of the earth's population in her spiritual corruption because of what she's doing. So people sometimes don't even realize the corruption that they're involved in because she will hold them captive. So the description of her is presented as one who sits on many waters in Revelation 17, verse 1. This means the waters which you saw where the harlot sits, they represent people. They represented multitudes. It represents nations, and it represents tongues. So many nations, a multitude. So the reference water is representing a multitude of people in verse 15 of Revelation 17. So in verse 2, she's further described as making the inhabitants of the earth drunk with the wine of her fornication. Not literally drunk, but because she's held the nation captive in her corruption. So drunkenness is in a sort of semi-unconscious state. So sometimes we ourselves face those situations where we're in a semi-conscious state and we do things that normally when we are active and alert, we wouldn't attempt to even do those things. So this woman, the Scarlet woman, she's described as making the inhabitants of the earth drunk, in that state, in other words, with the wine of her fornication, of what she will do, the corruption that she comes to perform. So how is this Scarlet woman further described in Revelations? So the woman of this chapter is described as being arrayed. She's arrayed. In other words, she's dressed up, and she's dressed up in very fine apparel. She's also dressed in fine apparel of purple and scarlet. She's also, you must notice that she's also adorned with gold. Not only is she adorned with gold, but she's got semi-precious stones, she's got precious stones, and she's got pearls. We know how beautiful these stones, these expensive stones are, and how expensive gold and pearl is. Well, she was decked in all that sort of stuff, in other words. Now, this is full of the abomination and the filthiness of her fornication in verses 4 of chapter 17. So because of the distinct color of her clothing, she's also referred to as the Scarlet Woman of Revelation. So now you see why reference has been made to her as the Scarlet Woman. So modern implications or understanding of the color scarlet is depicted or seen as infidelity. In the first century, when the book of Revelation was written, clothing which was made of a reddish purple color was much prized. Why? Because of its high quality. And it was commonly worn by persons or individuals of a high rank, someone of a high status, someone of wealth. I love the color purple. In fact, that is my favorite color because it's very distinctive, it's regal, it's royal, it represents royalty. So that's how rich the color is. So people in those days who wore that sort of color, they represented wealth and rank, high ranking. How do I know this? Mark 15 verses 17 says so, Mark 15:20, and Luke 16 verses 9. You can take your own time, turn to it, research it, and read it. So the color purple contains more blue than crimson. I don't know if you're aware of that. It's a very strong blue mixed with red, with crimson, in other words. which gives it that strong color, purple. So though the limits are not very accurately defined, and the words are sometimes interchanged, therefore the mocked robe, which was put on Yeshua the Messiah, is called in Mark 15:17 and Mark 15:20, purpurine, which means purple. So Yeshua had that color garment on. Also in Matthew 27:8, it's called kohinim, which means crimson, a crimson color. The point I'm trying to make, being dressed in purple and scarlet, is that this woman appears to be a woman of great wealth, of great ranking, and of great authority. That's what I'm trying to get at. I hope you understand where I'm coming from. So this color of clothing also acts as a complement to her. So this scarlet woman also was wearing her gold and her precious stones and her pearls, as well as, if you notice, the use of a golden cup. So she had a cup which she used, which was of pure gold. So the distinction to this beautiful, impressive exterior is that her cup is filled with the abominations and the filthiness of her fornications. And this is in Revelations 17 verses 4. So this woman was decked in fine array. She looks like someone of very high society, some very powerful, influential person, holding this golden cup, which was full of corruption and filth. In other words, she deceived many by her appearance. And I'm sure you yourselves will say, someone's appearance will tell how regal they are or how unregal they are. So her appearance will deceive many because she looks like someone who is a high-ranking official. She's powerful, she's wealthy, she's well together, she knows it all, she's got everything going her way. She looks beautiful and she has all the trappings and the demeanor of wealth. But although she has all of that, and she looks beautiful, and she goes about with that air of grace, of luxury, and of authority, we need to understand that her actions are an abomination to Yahweh. Her actions are corrupt. So in verse 5 of Revelation 17, we see what this woman's name is called. In verse 5, straight away, we see what her name is called. Her name is called Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. So now we see what this scarlet woman is all about. It's not all her trappings and what she wears and how she walks and how she behaves and who she influences. She is an abomination of the earth. Note, I want you to note that this title is also inscribed in very bold letters if you're looking in your Bibles and you're following me. So although the letters of this passage was not capitalized in the original Greek manuscript, a number of translations, in fact, most translations have done so. And similarly, if you turn to Matthew, or if you make note, Matthew 27 verses 37, Mark 15:26, Luke 23:38, and John 19:19, it is also inscribed in capital letters, uppercase letters, solid letters. So this is done in order to indicate that this was a title of inscription. The reference which was made regarding Babylon is an indication that just as Babylon, the first of 4 ruling world empires, which was foretold by Yahweh in the book of Daniel, had spread and enforced its false, adulterous form of worship, so would this woman. So it's in Daniel, and she's coming to do exactly the same as recorded in the book of Daniel. So as the mother of harlots, the Scarlet woman, she would also have daughters who would teach similar abominable doctrines. So it's not just her. She will teach others to do the same. She will teach others to replicate her. So there will be others like her. These teachings would be in opposition to what Yahshua and his disciples taught. You remember in the book of Matthew where Yahshua was teaching his disciples and he taught them about the end times upon Mount Olive in Matthew 24. So this will go completely against the teaching of Yahshua and his disciples, what he taught them. Additionally, we are told that this woman is responsible for the deaths of the faithful martyrs of Yahshua. This is in Revelation 17:6. So she will be responsible for the death of many martyrs. How sad. And that this woman also is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. In Revelation 17:18, I trust you're following me. So when we review history, since the time of Yahshua, the Roman Catholic Church, which is located in Rome, in the independent territory of the Vatican, it has indeed ruled over kings of the earth in the past. I don't know if you're aware of that, but that is how powerful the Roman Catholic Church is. It has ruled over kings of the earth in the past, though they are believers in name. But this institution had also persecuted Yahweh's faithful people throughout the ages, alarmingly so. And it has also changed the fundamental doctrines which was taught by Yahshua and the first century apostles. Shamefully so. So the pressure to change the doctrines which Yahshua and his disciples had established, it began in the first century. Not just now, not just today. It is still changing, I'll have you know, but this started in the first century. In the first century. Jude wrote in his writing to early believers, he said, I found it, this is in Jude 1, verses 3 and 4. He said, I found it necessary to write to you, exhorting you to contend earnestly for the faith which was once for all delivered to the saints. For certain men, he says, have crept in unnoticed, who long ago were marked out for this condemnation. He went on to say there were unholy men who turned the grace of Yahweh into lewdness and deny the only Yahweh and Messiah. This is back in Jude 1, verses 3 to 4. So the first century, we can see the first century assemblies of Yahweh, that they had faced pressures. They faced pressures from the brothers in Judea who had taught them that unless they were circumcised in accordance with the customs of Moses, they would not be saved, and that their males required circumcision. This is in Acts 15. So they have been faced with a lot of pressure from the first century. They also face pressure from people claiming to be believers in order to make the assemblies less Jewish. So what became the Roman Catholic Church led those who were determined to make the assemblies less Jewish. I hope you're following me. So anti-Semitism, which you heard, anti-Semitism, it was clearly involved in these churches on scriptural decision to worship on a Sunday rather than a Saturday, which is the Sabbath. So they were the ones who made the changes from worship from a Saturday to a Sunday. The Council of Laodicea determined that believers would not practice Judaism by resting on the Sabbath, but that they must work on that day rather than honoring Yahweh's day. And if they can, rest them as believers. But if any shall be found to be Judaist, let them be denounced or cursed from Yahshua or from Yahweh. This is what was said. So a lot of pressure was put on the people of Yahweh to worship on a Sunday rather than the Saturday, because it was more productive. Business was more lucrative on a Saturday, on the Sabbath, than on the Sunday. So that is when anti-Semitism started to influence the church. So the change from Saturday to Sunday as a day of worship is one of the most prominent changes which was made by the Roman Catholic Church to the biblical sanctioned doctrines of the assemblies of Yahweh. Many other equally wrong changes took place regarding Yahweh's holy days, as we know, but I won't go into that now. So in Revelation 17, it speaks about a beast also in Revelation 17. The beast in this section of scripture is regarded as the Roman Empire. So I hope you're traveling with me this far. So although the human leader of this empire is also called the beast in Revelations 19:20, here in Revelation 17:3, this term refers to the Roman Empire. So one of the most intriguing descriptions of the woman of Revelation 17 is found in verse 3. And in verse 3 it says, "And I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns." Now, as explained in our Sabbath teachings and in our previous Sabbath teachings, the beast in the book of Revelation, it is a continuation of the 4th great historical empire, which I mentioned time and time again, the Roman Empire. So now you all know, and it was prophesied in Daniel 7 verses 1 to 8. If you take time to study Daniel 7, 1 to 8. In fact, all of Daniel is about prophecy, and it's important for you to read and understand this. It is shared on Total on a Wednesday evening if you want to get more insight into Daniel and the prophecy and how it links into Revelation. So then, going back to the scarlet woman, it appears then that the woman sitting on the beast controls, either she controls or she rules this beast. So as a rider on a horse controls, we know a rider on a horse, it controls or it directs the animal to its destination. So we notice that this woman is sitting on the beast. So this tells me that she controls the beast or she rules the beast. Because if you sit on an animal, you are in control of that animal. So this is a representation of the Latin Roman Church in her highest state of Antichrist prosperity. for she sits upon the scarlet-colored beast, a striking resemblance of her complete domination over secular Latin Roman Empire. So the Holy Roman Empire was thus called the name of the empire centered in Europe and controlled by the Roman Catholic Church. As for the 7 heads of the beast, these are regarded as 7 mountains on which the Scarlet Woman sits. If you notice, there are also 7 kings. There are 7 kings. Now, back in previous study, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. Yeah, 7 king. And when he comes, he must continue for a short period of time. I don't know if you can remember a few weeks ago, I said it was 3.5 years, if you've taken notes or you remember. Now, let's look at the 10 horns. Revelation 17 explains the 10 horns which we read of. They are the representation of 10 kings who've received no kingdom as yet. These 10 crowns on the beast, they represent 10 kings who've received no kingdoms as yet, but they will receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast, just for 1 hour. Now, these kings will have one mindset. They're of one mind. They will have one focus. They will give their power and authority to the beast. This is in verses 12 and 13 of Revelation 17. So they will have one mindset for 1 hour. And then all of those 10 kings will give their power and their authority to this beast, which the Scarlet Woman sits upon. When we put this information together, we see that the Scarlet Woman, the Roman Empire, what was prophesied to ride or to control successive continuations of the empire, the last of which will arise at the end of the age. Now, remember, John was transported in a vision to a time near the end of time. That's where John was transported. When John wrote that 5 kings had fallen and that 1 existed, he was describing the Roman Empire, which is a final revival of the Roman Empire. The one John said has not yet come. This is in verse 10 of Revelation 17. This will be a combination of 10 kings that will come together with one mind to form a final short-lived appearance of this historic 4th Roman Empire, which was spoken of in the book of Daniel, chapter 7. So now you see, this end of the age empire, which the harlot, the Scarlet Woman, she will control for a short period of time. It will now receive its power from the enemy, the devil, in collaboration with the 10 kings who's given the beast its power. So the enemy, the devil, is the beast in Revelation 13:4, which says, so they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast. Now, earlier in the book of Revelations, the dragon and the enemy is described as having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its head. This is in Revelation 12:3, which we've gone through. Remember we spoke the woman, the dragon, and the beast? The woman, the dragon, and the child, sorry. This passage simply shows that as the God of this present evil age, the enemy has control of power over the kingdoms of this earth. So the enemy will have control and power over the kingdoms of this world. It says so in 2 Corinthians 4 verses 4, Galatians 1:4, and Matthew 4 verses 8 and 9. But there is an end to this scarlet woman. There is an end to this whore of Babylon, the scarlet woman. There is an end to her. However, because of the influence of the enemy and the woman clothed in scarlet, the 10 horns or the 10 kings, they will give their power and authority to the beast in Revelation 17:13. Receive authority, they will receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast in verse 12. Before their short rule is over, these kings will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them. Now, who is the Lamb that I'm talking about? He is indeed Yahshua, who is our King of Kings in verse 14. So apparently, after realizing that these nations had been deceived or disappointed by the scarlet woman, they will then turn on her and they will destroy her. They will then turn on her and destroy her. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot. They will hate the scarlet woman, which will make her become desolate. She'll become naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her skin with fire. Why? Because Yahweh has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose. So that is the reason why they will turn on her. They'll be of one mind and give their kingdom to the beast. That is the ultimate purpose of being of one mind and giving their power and authority to the beast for 1 hour, so that Yahweh's plan will be fulfilled. They will destroy her. This is in Revelation chapter 17, verses 16 and 17. So she won't live for too long. I hope that you have gained some insight into who the scarlet woman is, what the scarlet woman represents, and what the color purple and the color scarlet represents, and also a bit more insight into the Roman Empire, what they've done and what they're still continuing to do. We'll stop here for now until next Saturday, when we will continue to look at Revelations. So we looked at Revelation chapter 17 this week. We will look at Revelation chapter 18 next week, where it speaks about the mystery Babylon the Great in Revelation chapter 18. Thank you very much for stopping by and listening. May Yahweh continue to bless and keep you. May he continue to shed light in your lives, in your hearts, and in your minds. Please join us at 3 p.m. for our Sabbath worship time. Yahweh bless you. Shalom for now. Shalom.
time